There we go. So we're now being recorded. And obviously, if I can ask you all to keep muted. Little bit of housekeeping. So yeah, keep muted if you possibly can. If you've got a burning question and you don't understand something, then obviously if you could type it in chat, and Audrey's going to be my chat monitor. So my glamorous assistant this evening is Audrey Turner. And Audrey will stop me mid-flow and say, I've got a burning question for you, Neil. Can you answer this particular question? And I'll obviously either ask you to turn your microphone on and ask me directly. But if you can keep questions to the end, we'll have a bit of an open house and see where we go from there. So again, thank you everybody for joining. It's my immense privilege this evening, I must admit, to be delivering this session to my peers. I'm used to talking to students all the time, and obviously trying to impart some knowledge and wisdom if I possibly can. But to be talking to my peers does actually feel quite a bit different. So it is a little bit nerve-wracking. Oops. Right, so I'm currently president of IOH, previously served as vice president, and prior to that was director of education. I've had over 3 decades of experience in occupational health in a variety of settings, including the lead acid battery industry. I worked at a place that's now well closed, long closed, called Tungstone Batteries in Market Harborough. I've also worked for a large provider in a number of areas, including waterways. I think there was a cigarette filter factory, manufacturing, food, all over the place. And obviously now I'm senior lecturer at the University of Derby. So I teach on the occupational health degree course, which is either SCPHN, BSc Honours, or postgraduate diploma leading to full masters, and also on the pre-registration programme for the MSc adult nursing programme. So I do 2 days a week with them. I'm also currently a student doing my postgraduate certificate in interprofessional practice education. So that's basically my teaching qualification. Right, so the learning aim for this evening is that we're going to really try and look at exploring the concept of critical reflection as a means of personal and professional development. And we're going to do that by critically analysing the usefulness of critical reflection in occupational health. We're also going to explore the models of critical reflection that you can use as a tool to help you improve a given situation. And we're also going to try and help you to choose a suitable model for reflection for yourselves. So when I go through some of these models, you might see, I'll tell you the easy one, the one that lots of people go to, which is very easily adapted. That doesn't necessarily lend itself quite so much to the, I suppose, the more critical side of it, but it is still very useful. We'll also look at other models that you'll be able to use that do lend themselves to more criticality. So critical reflection really, I suppose, is an active process of learning. And it's more than thinking or thoughtful action, because sometimes, you know, when we're looking back on something, we can look at it in the eyes and almost relive it to say, right, well, what actually did happen there? And that's reflection. So reflection is still using those visions that you'll be able to see about what happened, but it's about taking you on a further learning journey and looking at it critically, but also analytically, and using some of those skills to actually shape your learning and also therefore future development. So really, I suppose you could say that critical reflection does result in learning, and that is by changing your ideas and hopefully sometimes the understanding of a given situation. It involves problematizing clinical practice, I suppose, really. It's saying, right, okay, well, that happened. Why did it happen? Could I have done something differently? So although I use that word fairly loosely, it doesn't have to be a problem as such that you're looking at. It could be something that actually went quite well, but also you want to learn more about how to deal with it in a more efficient way in the future. Something that might lead to better practice or finding more evidence to enhance your practice. And also, what we also need to consider is that critical reflection for the modern day practitioner is going to be really useful in making sure that we get the best outcomes for our patients, our workers, or our clients. Doesn't matter what situation you're in. I actually like to use the word workers to describe patients in occupational health. So I'm probably going to be using that throughout. So it obviously is looking at problematizing clinical practice by recognizing that yours, or maybe even other people's practice, is not without dilemmas and issues. Even if something went well, it doesn't mean to say that it was perfect and it couldn't be improved upon. So critical reflection is this cyclical journey. It's not a straight, so we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. So whichever model we use, it's always to be used cyclical. You never really stop learning, because as we know, being a nurse, being a healthcare professional, we're signing up as part of the code. So the NMC code 2018 really suggests that we are in the process of lifelong learning. I've met a few people that you know, are not really into learning and they're stuck in their ways, but practice is changing. Practice is changing dramatically, and we have to keep up in order to give the best care and the best outcomes to the workers in occupational health, to the managers, to the businesses that we work for, and providing the you know, really good value service to all our stakeholders. So it encourages you really, I suppose, to look at issues from a different perspective. And that is then going to help you understand the issues. And I say issues, doesn't necessarily mean problems. It's things that you've decided to look at. And it allows you to scrutinize your own values, your assumptions, and also can give you a different perspective on things as well. So you can see that I probably, I hope it's coming across that I'm quite passionate about critical reflection. So it would be a good idea if we could have a show of hands as to how many people had used critical reflection before. So if you can, I think there should be a tool on here somewhere where you can raise your hand. So yep, Janet's done it. Yep, so there's quite a few of you. It's really useful to know. So it looks as though we've got something like 15, 16, it's rising all the time. So you'll notice that I've used this picture, and I've used this picture specifically because it shows that linear process that some people try to apply to critical reflection. And you can see that the people are moving across those steps one by one. And what I want to try and do is to try and get rid of that process of reflection, which is just going through mindlessly, going, you know, from hither to thither and thinking, right, okay, well, what happened and what can I make of it, and making it into a process and turning it into something that you are in control of, rather than it just being a brain dump of thinking about, well, what happened. There we go. So hopefully it means that you'll be developing a habit of reflective learning to help you evaluate your own progress, to monitor and manage your own performance, Also, hopefully to motivate yourself, to encourage your learning, and also to keep focus on your learning goals. Because just because you've learned one thing, it doesn't necessarily mean to say that the information or the policy or the frameworks or whatever it is that's behind there in terms of evidence is not going to change. So if you've done a critical reflection and you've written it down, you've always got a copy of it. So it means you can actually then revisit it in that cyclical way and say, right, okay, well, yeah, I've noted down what I learned. But it's also really, I suppose, being able to revisit it and say, right, okay, I'm going to revisit it. I'm going to look at what the current evidence is now, because it might have changed. So keeping it cyclical and making sure that you follow this process is going to hopefully be of benefit to you. So it also helps you to think differently about how you can achieve your goals. By, for instance, if you know what your learning strategy is or your learning or study techniques are, I'm sure all of you have heard of VARC, so visual, auditory, reading and writing, or kinesthetic. So it's a good idea to try and find out what your learning style is, so that obviously you'll be able to focus on that particular learning technique. We also use this at the beginning of the university program, so that people can basically develop their skills and obviously get the most from the lectures and skills frameworks that we actually give. And it is used quite successfully. It also helps you to think about and overcome what might be blocking your learning by using a different approach or setting more pragmatic or realistic goals. So it can be really quite useful in your learning. So don't underestimate its power. It can be really, really powerful. So really what I suppose it's doing is allowing you to, I suppose, have that bit of brain dump, but also do it in a structured and coherent way, so that when you've actually put your stuff down, your work down onto paper, it actually means that it makes some coherent sense that not only you could understand, and the idea is that you could use reflection as part of a piece of study, or you can use it as a piece of your learning, and then you've always got the record to be able to go back to. Whereas if you just do a mind map, in 2 years' time, it's not going to mean anything to you. Whereas if you've got it in a coherent, structured way, it's going to mean an awful lot more. It also is going to support and enrich your professional practice, because really, and this is the most important part, because it ensures that you're better placed to respond and to manage new and unexpected, sometimes complex situations. It can also be a key requirement at master's level, because it's about evaluation. You're evaluating something. You're going back at it and looking at it from a different viewpoint to work out why, to work out when, to work out what, how, and all those different things. And particularly the question at master's level that we often look at is, so what? So what does that mean? So what does that tell us? So what does that mean in terms of developing our practice going forward? And these are all really, really important issues. We can see, therefore, that it means that when we use that term critical reflection, it refers to a combination of analytical questioning, that could be described as critical thinking as well, and also reflective approaches. So basically what that means is you're using what happened, your reflection, and you're allowing that then to inform some analytical questioning, linking it to theories, to frameworks, to other people's work, to inform your learning to change what might happen in the future. And basically that would be the ideal. So it's analytical questioning with a balance of the reflection or the reflective approaches of what happened. And there is bound to be some element of description in there, which then doesn't become critical. But it's important at certain stages to have more critical thinking, You will need to put references in there. You will need to put citations. Loach 2021 said or suggested, hypothesized, whatever. And it's really important that you use that citation to inform your learning, to be able to then go back and find that information more easily. When you write reflectively, as the writer, you're the primary subject. They're your thoughts, they're your feelings, and they're your experiences. And they should really form the bulk of the examples that you use when you're writing, doing something like this. It might well be that it was as the result of somebody else's actions or somebody else's practice that made you think in that way, that made you feel in that way, that allowed you to experience something. So it's still your thoughts, your feelings, but the consequences of somebody else's actions might have affected you. So you can still do that to make sense of a situation if it doesn't make sense. It's really essential to understand that the purpose of writing reflectively is not just to describe your experiences, because I've written, I've read a number of revalidations when I've been the confirmer and also the, what's the other word? I can't think of the word now, it's gone off the top of my head. But when you're doing a revalidation for somebody for the NMC, and then really it just becomes really, really descriptive. And whilst that's really useful to find out what somebody has learned, it isn't backed up by evidence. And what are we? We're an evidence-based practitioners. So it's really important to bring that evidence into your reflection so that it shapes your learning going forward. And the goal should always be about personal growth and transformation, because we're on that journey. We're on that lifelong journey, and we can never stay still. And if we did, we wouldn't be able to transform our services and improve the outcomes for patients for the future. It can also really, I suppose, it's about critically exploring your own values, your beliefs, and your practices. And it allows you to do that in a structured and sometimes quite explicit way. It is going to facilitate that lifelong learning. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to stop talking about that. It's really important. And it allows you to develop as a practitioner. And I like this, this next bit. Maya Angelou said, "Now I know better, I do better." And that's resonated with me, that's stuck with me. So as reflective writing is, there we go, admit somebody quickly, there we go. So as reflective writing is a formal academic genre, it's important that you still use published theory against which to reflect and analyse your experiences. And you use that with a coherent and cohesive written structure. So for some people, critical self-reflection comes quite naturally, and for others, it requires a bit more work. It depends at what level of study that you've done before. And it doesn't necessarily mean to say just because you haven't done a master's, you're not going to be good at critical reflection. Far from it. Your level of I suppose, educational qualification doesn't make you a brilliant critical practitioner or critically reflective practitioner. It is something that can be learned. It's not easy for some people, and it definitely does come easier for some. But give it a go. That's what I'm saying. And certainly, I've got some. I've got a piece of literature that was actually published in OH Today a few months back. So that was the critical writing or pointers to better critical reflection, which has now been adopted as a key text by the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. Having that peer reviewed by them and selected as a key piece of their course for tropical medicine and vaccination and immunization for travel health is blown me away. It's such an honor and a privilege to be chosen at that level. So I can share that. So we're going to have a look at some of the reflective cycles. So this one is Gibbs. Gibbs is the one that most people feel quite comfortable with. It's more often used at level 6. So level 6 is BSc honours or undergraduate degree level. It doesn't mean to say that you can't use it as master's level study. You can. But obviously you can see from these that that is more likely to lead to, I suppose, more descriptive language. And obviously that's not something that is always going to be, I suppose, the best way of using a critical reflection if the majority of it is going to be critically descriptive or descriptive rather than just being a real critically reflective piece, because that would always be the ideal. So my prompt sheet's just suddenly disappeared, so bear with me. Right, okay. So with Gibbs, you've got some good points. So from a good point of view, it's basic. It's a great starting point. It's got 6 distinctive stages, which you can see there. So description, so what happened, feelings, what were you thinking and feeling, the evaluation, what was good and bad about your experience. But these are all quite descriptive. Until we get onto analysis, there's no real space for any critical, analytical or critically reflective information to be brought in. However, you can still bring those, but it doesn't naturally lead to it. So it's also got criticisms, and some of the criticisms are that it's quite superficial reflection. And there's no referral to critical thinking or analysis within most of the sections. But Atkins and Murphy in 1993 suggested that it does have a number of, a depth of probing questions, or sorry, it doesn't have the same depth of probing questions as some of the other models. So it's still useful, don't discount it. Master's students today are still using Gibbs reflective. It's how you do it and how you feel comfortable. You've then got Kolb's reflective cycle. This was work that was done in 1984. And this is talking about having concrete experience, so doing, what happened, doing or having an experience, and what was that experience. The reflective observation, so this is reviewing and reflecting on those experiences. And then there's that abstract conceptualization. So that's where you're concluding and learning from the experience. And that's where you would bring in the majority of the bodies of evidence that you are doing to inform what you're going to learn for the future. It then goes on to look at this active experimentation, which is about planning what you're going to do and planning on how you try out what you've learned. And then you go round in that cycle again and you revisit it. So you say, right, okay, so I've done my active experimentation. I'm going to put it in to plan how to put it into practice. Then I'm going to put it into practice and I'm going to see if I can learn and find something different or a better way of doing something, or find a new body of evidence that I wasn't able to find before to inform my practice and move it forward. You've got John's, which is a really popular one from 1995. This was from Rolf 2001, and this is what, so what, and what next. And this is, again, really useful because this is looking at, you know, the process of what happened, making sense of what happened, trying to apply some theory to it as well, and then obviously thinking about how you can move that forward. So what does that mean? And that so what bit is something that we use regularly in master's level study. So what does that mean? So what does that going to, or so how or what is that going to change your practice going forward? The so what bit, it tells you about what does this tell me? So what does this tell me? you could also use that as, so what does it teach me? You can also look at things, so, you know, what does that mean to my patient? So what does that mean to the outcomes for that patient? So you can bring in so much into that so what. The what is what happened, and the so what is the learning journey that you're going to reflect upon. And then what next can also be used as that planning stage. And the what next bit is, what do I need to do in order to make things better? What do I need to do in terms of resolving the situation? What next in terms of, you know, making the patient or me or anybody else, the relative or whatever, feel better? What next? What do we do? And you can use all that evidence and that body of evidence to feed that into it as well. So this particular one is one of my favorites. It's the students on the SCPHN programs and also the MSc pre-reg, they tend to gravitate towards that once they've tried it, because it feels so instinctive. It leads you into those critically analytical, exploring questions. And with that, it's often described as Rolf et al.'s framework for reflexive learning as well. And its criticisms are that sometimes it can be a little bit too complicated for a beginner, and particularly one who's definitely new to reflection. And if it was somebody that was new to reflection, the go-to would probably be always Gibbs. But John's model as well is always going to be about looking out and looking in. Actually, this, I think I've labelled this incorrectly. This is Rolf et al., not John's. John's is looking in and looking out. So forgive me for that. That is a fundamental error that I have just spotted. So yeah, Rolf is that, what, so what, and what next. There's others that you can also use as well. So the SCPHN model is reflection in action. So that's at the time reflection. So as the event is happening, so you're reflecting on the experience itself, thinking about it during the event, deciding how to act at the time, and then acting immediately. So for instance, we would do this instinctively. If we'd got an emergency situation, you are going to reflect back on what you've learned previously. So what you would do is you would pull all those resources together. Say you're dealing with a cardiac arrest, you're going to reflect on the experience as it happens. You're going to go through it, you're going to live it, you're going to think about the event, you're going to bring up all your practice from the past, and you're going to act immediately on instincts. And then you can do something afterwards, which is reflection on action. So what that is about, that's about reflecting on something that has happened in the past, thinking about what you might do differently if it happened again, and also thinking about the new information that you've gained, or the theoretical perspectives from study, from looking for those sources of information and from that best practice, and how that's going to inform your experience and practice going forward, that allows you to then process those feelings and actions. That one as well is also, I suppose, really useful in terms of, you know, informing immediate practice. And SCPHN's model, the criticisms are that it highlights the difference between two different types of reflection, but it doesn't really provide extensive guidance for carrying out either. If I hadn't gone through that and hadn't used this pictorial representation that I've taken from somebody else's work that you'll be able to see at the end, it wouldn't be, if we got rid of the arrows and just used the yellow boxes, it wouldn't actually be as meaningful, would it? And if you saw that as a concept, you'd think, well, yeah, that's just reflection that you would do every day. But it's only when you really dig down into it and you look at the actual work that SCPHN did that you'll find out what the actual meanings were and how they decided that that was the best way to actually to do that within their their concept of that particular model. You got Driscoll from 1994, and Driscoll's model is about having an experience in clinical practice. So this is really one that was designed specifically for healthcare practice. So this is about having that experience. You're still using what, a description of the event, but you're purposely reflecting on selected aspects of that experience in clinical practice. So you may not want to take the whole of that experience. You might want to break it down purposefully on selecting a particular aspect of it. They go on to use the so what, so the analysis of the event. And then that leads to discovering what learning arises from that process of reflection, so that you can go on to look at the theory in further detail about now what. So looking at your proposed actions that you've learnt about within that reflection, and then actually moving it forward. You can see that the inflection with the 3 arrows means that it's going to really have an impact on your experience in clinical practice, because you've been able to look at the learning and put that into action from what you've learnt from what you've written about and reflected upon in a critical manner. And that's really something that can be really very powerful. Driscoll is another one that students tend to naturally gravitate towards, because it informs their practice and their learning so much better. There's other examples. There's Borton's developmental framework, and that again uses what, so what, and now what. And the concept behind that is what happened, why it was important, and what you can take away from it, simplistically. You've got Gibbs, that's obviously the description, the evaluation, the analysis, the conclusions, and then an action plan. You've got Kolb's experiential learning cycle, which is the experience using observations, turning that into concept development and theorizing, and then obviously testing the implications in new situations. And you move through distinct stages and re-enter the cycle or spiral with each new event. You've got Marks, Moran and Rosie's reflection cycle. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that one. Very similar, the incident, the reflective observation, the related theory that goes with it, and also you can look at future action. That one splits it up into the descriptive part and also very much the related theory part that is going to inform your learning going forward. Jasper's reflective spiral is also a useful one, because that's talking and bringing up about your experience. It's looking at action, the reflection, and also helping you to form that new perspective. So I think there's lots of reading, and certainly with the work that I've done for pointers for better critical reflection, it should actually make more sense. So really, you need to remember that applying reflective learning, applying reflective learning effectively is going to take time. It's not something that you can do, you know, at the click of a finger and say, right, okay, I'm going to do this in the next 20 minutes. You're not going to be able to do it in 20 minutes. This is something that can take hours. So you need to set some time aside. Remember that don't expect everything to immediately fall into place. Sometimes you need to go away when you've read somebody's theory or somebody's concept, or you've read a new piece of work, you've read something that beforehand you've never come across. You actually need to be able to turn that concept or that new learning into reality, and how that might be able to inform your practice. So you go from conceptualization to learning how to apply it, or to application going forward. So don't underestimate that it's, you know, it's going to be an instant learning journey, because it's not. You're just going to need to turn that theorizing or that theory into a concept, and then into actualization in terms of realizing what it means for you in practice, and how it can help you inform your practice as well. So basically, it's a process that facilitates through transforming a unique learning experience. And really, the insight that you're going to gain about yourself as you engage in a reflective process are not things that can be learnt from a book. Sometimes you just have to go with the flow. They can't necessarily be taught in a classroom, because I can't tell you how to feel. You know how you felt. The bit that I could help you with as a lecturer, and obviously in that respect, is we can help you to find the information. We can help you to learn how to reference the material that you've learned from, to cite it effectively in the work. But your learning comes from within. There are lots of people that can write brilliant, brilliant essays that then can't go on to put it into practice. There are those that can't write brilliant essays, but are really, really good reflective, critically reflective practitioners. Because as long as it makes sense to you, it doesn't really matter if you're not on a university course. If you're on a university course, I'm sorry, you have no choice, you have to follow the rules. But if you're not on a university course, does it really matter if you don't follow those rules properly? As long as you can demonstrate where you found that information and that you understand the theories and you can move that learning forward from concept into actualization and transformation into practice, that's fine. It does help you if you've been away from formal education and have not engaged in continuous professional development for some time. Say you've been away from practice for a while, for instance. Doing this as a learning journey can actually be really quite useful as well. And really, I suppose it's important that if you're doing it for academic work, that you put it into a formal draft and you look at how you're doing it in that more formal education setting. But you can do that, you know, you can do your plan like you would a plan when you were writing an essay. Every one of you in this room has written an essay at some point. It doesn't mean to say that you can't get back into that style. You can quite easily. So don't underestimate your brain. You will be able to get back into it. I have. It takes commitment and it takes discipline. And you, like I said before, you have to set some time aside. So you might say, right, okay, for the next week or so, I'm going to do a couple of hours a night on trying to find that information. I'm going to, you know, start writing once I've done my plan. I can do the descriptive bits because they're really easy. And then obviously what you need to do is to try and find out where you find that information from. And you know where to find that information from. And if you don't, then obviously there are a number of places that can help you inform that practice. So it might just be the health and safety executive, where you've got a particular piece of legislation. It might well be from NICE that, you know, there's a new piece of guidance that's come out on how to care for a specific patient with a long-term condition. It might be journals. It might be something that you've read, hopefully, in OH Today. Because as you'll see from that, you'll find that we are becoming much more peer-reviewed and much more, there's much more critical analysis and critical thinking in the articles that are coming forward. And it's lovely to see. We get some people obviously responding back to us and saying, that's really informed my practice. I was able to go and find that information really easily, and it's helped me with a really complex patient. So obviously these are really good things for us to be able to hear. And that's obviously because of the amount of effort that Lynn Pratt and the board have put into making sure that we're getting this really high quality, informative, critical, analytical thinking, and hopefully promoting that for you guys, the members. So The feelings can sometimes be quite uncomfortable. They can sometimes elicit an unexpected emotional response. Sometimes to the conclusions reached, either about your own role, and you think, do you know what? Somebody once said to me only a few months ago, I did that critical reflection. It's made me realize I'm not in the right job. And off they went, found the right job, happy as Larry. So it can actually help you move forward out of a difficult situation in an employment situation, for instance. Don't underestimate how strong and how powerful this can be. You need to remember that the nature of the process itself is sometimes quite difficult. You can be well acquainted with one aspect of reflective learning, such as responding to or acting on feedback received from tutors or your peers. But the ability to be able to balance a critique of experience with academic and professional requirements is something that you might not be 100% familiar with. So it's about active experimentation. And reflective thinking cannot be taught. It needs to be practiced. So if somebody tells you, oh, don't worry about that, I can teach you how to do reflective thinking, no, they can't. They can show you an example of a good way to do reflective thinking for them, but it might not work for you. So there are some key features of reflection that will often result in learning. So we know, and we've said before, that it can change your ideas and your understanding of a situation, and that can be really important, particularly if that situation was distressing. Reflection is an active and dynamic process, and that can involve reflecting on past experience, so reflecting on action, and also you can use it as reflective in action, like we described in one of the models earlier. And then there's also reflecting for action. And that is how it's going to shape what you do for the future. So there's reflective on, in, and for that is going to inform your practice in a much, much better way. I'm going to go back to that bit and talk about reflection as not being that linear process, but it's cyclical. It's going to lead you to development of new ideas that you can then use to plan your next stages of learning and keep going round in that circle so that you don't become static and that you do actually enjoy lifelong learning. I think that when I left the NHS, I'd done a lot of learning about the NHS. And I was thinking about the end of my career, and I was thinking about, okay, so what am I going to do? What am I going to do towards the end of my career, and how can I give back? And then suddenly out of the blue, the University of Derby popped up and said, can you help us with a course? And I thought, oh my God, this is great. This is such an opportunity. It's what I've been itching and burning to do because I want to learn. I want to learn even more. And I then actually want to share that learning with others. And obviously by doing this and by using reflection and by using the critical analytical thinking that I've learned over the years and also refreshed upon since I've been teaching and learning for myself, it's actually enhanced what I can do. It's enhanced the way that I write. It's enhanced my writing dramatically. If any of you will have seen any of my writing beforehand and using critical analytical skills, the critical discussion in the early stages of OH today, and then looking at it now, it's poles apart. It's totally different. And any student that starts doing, whether you're a skilled practitioner or whether you're a student coming into occupational health very new, if you've never used critical reflection before, and then you go on that journey and you start to use it in practice to inform your practice for better outcomes and better standards, then certainly what it's going to do is it's going to get even better. The quality of your writing is going to get even better. And it's only by going on this journey and using critical reflection that my writing And my writing has been peer reviewed, and also from recent academic work that I've put in as a student myself, getting 90% for a master's level piece of work that I've just put in for my PG cert. That's only because, that's not because I'm a fantastic writer. I wasn't, but I'm better. I'm so much better now at using that clinical, analytical, critical side and making sense of a given situation. And that's what it's all about. By giving you that example, I'm not blowing my own trumpet. I don't need to. But it shows the level of how you can improve on your understanding of a given situation, and therefore hopefully improve on the outcomes for the patients themselves, the workers, the managers, and everybody else that's involved with the care that you do. Excuse me, I'm getting really dry. It's not gin, I promise. So there are rules, and the rules when you're doing it is you must keep it anonymous. If you're going to use it for your own practice, it's not quite so important that you keep it anonymous, but it's good practice anyway. So under the code, you would use pseudonyms, you might use initials, but there shouldn't really be any identifying information. It's always a good idea to start off when you're doing a critical reflection to talk about why you are using that particular model. So you're going to say, right, okay, for the purposes of this critical reflection, I am going to use Gibbs, da-di-da-di-da, 1996. I've chosen this because. And then obviously that's going to give you a brownie point if it's for academic work, because you've got your first citation in your first sentence. You've then also got your first reference. And it's always really useful to start building as you go along and as you find the evidence to build up your citations and making sure that you've got that right. You need to reference your reading and use citations throughout. And if you're doing, say, I don't know, it could be, let's say it's between 1,000 and 2,000 words. So it's not massive. You would generally try and tend to have about 10 references for 1,000 words. That's a good standard to go for. The higher level of academic work that you're doing, then you need to read more and you need to evidence that you've read more by having more references and citations. And if you're doing a critical evaluation, then certainly you are more likely to have a lot more reading, references and citations within your work. But it's a good idea to, if you've not done this before, to have a go at it and start using citation and references. And even if you've got 4 or 5, you've started on that journey. If it's not for academic work, it doesn't matter so much. I would far sooner you have a go at it and think, do you know what? He was right. I can do this. And it isn't that hard. And I've taught myself to do that. Make sure that it makes sense. There's always that mnemonic that is a useful one to remember, and that's KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. All right? So keep it simple. And obviously, stupid, don't get lost in the detail. Don't get hooked up into trying to write in a fancy academic style and then lose the detail in it. It's got to be able to make sense. It's got to be done using plain English. There's no point in using gobbledygook all the way through that you're then not going to be able to read. Or particularly if you're going to be using this kind of style for your revalidation, you want the person, the confirmer, to be able to actually have that discussion with you, and they understand it and can ask you questions about it, so that that can then inform them that you are that worthy practitioner that has really learned so much and is having a really dynamic conversation. And it then becomes easy to give that signature saying, yes, this person is good, is a reflective practitioner. They've got lifelong learning at their core, and they are definitely suitable to be signed off. Use the model. Even if it's Gibbs, it doesn't matter. Don't make one up just yet, unless we've got some budding academics that want to start and think about using a new model. Then obviously you're going to need to do a systematic analysis. You're probably going to need to write theoretically and turn that theoretically thinking into some kind of concept so that people can then use it going forward. And you do need to use headings. This is the only academic writing genre style that you should use headings at this level. You can use headings at PhD level, but you don't use headings in your essays or assignments at BSc Honours and Master's level, but you definitely need to do them in reflective writing. So critical reflections that you're using to inform your practice, you use a model and you use headings. This is also the only academic genre that you can say I, because they're your feelings or my feelings. I felt, this happened, this made me feel. It's about your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your experiences. They're yours, not anybody else's, not the third person, not the author's. They're yours. They belong to you. Don't forget that. It's really, really important. And it's also then easier to not get so lost in that detail, because you can explain what your thoughts and feelings are and almost relive them as you go through them when you're rewriting them. And that's sometimes when you can get that emotional response, particularly if it was something that was distressing. So don't underestimate how powerful this can be going forward. Okay, so where does that take us? It might just be that doing something like this, you can find that missing piece. You know how some things don't make sense? And then all of a sudden you have that eureka moment and you think, oh my God, there it is. You stupid thing. You've suddenly, oh my God, now it makes sense. It's actually more likely to happen the more reading that you do, the more learning that you do, and the acceptance of going on that lifelong journey. And also then turning that theory, that concept that you've learnt about, putting it onto paper is going to help you make sense of it to carry it forward in your practice. Because what you're doing when you do that, when you're reflecting on what happened, you're actually then able to reflect more fully and appreciate how it might be different, or it might inform your practice going forward, because you've got those thoughts in your head about if you'd done that in that situation, how it might have changed the outcome. And that's how, and that's why it's sometimes made me think, and when we were thinking about the title for this, the failure to success, is because sometimes, even though things were okay, you actually think, well, yeah, it was a good enough outcome, but you know, it could have done better. If you can then turn that whole thing around, it enables you in your head to say, right, okay, that was good outcome, but I need a better one. And if it happens again, I'm only going to be happy if I can find a better way forward that's going to make the patient feel better and me more satisfied in making sure that I have got the best outcome for my patient going forward. I'm going to show you a little bit of a video. It's actually a University of Northampton one. And it's one that I came across that I actually really, really liked because it's quite simple. And I've gone for Gibbs here because I think that if you haven't used critical reflection, because there are a lot of you in the room that haven't, this might actually make sense of the Gibbs one in order for you to start.
Reflective practice is all about learning from experience. It's an important strategy for lifelong learning and the improvement of your professional service. It should challenge you, your previous knowledge, and possibly your values. Reflective writing needs to show how you have changed through a process. As for models, there is no right one. Tutors generally have a preference, so check your module guide and notes. This video will talk through Gibbs' cycle of reflection. Gibbs is used widely across the university and gives you a clear structure to navigate your reflections on a particular event. You may have seen a cycle such as this one. Let's look at it in more depth. Firstly, describe the relevant details briefly. Any more than the key facts at this stage will be a waste of your word count. Then, identify what influenced your feelings and whether they changed during the event. Did they affect your actions? For evaluation, think about your judgments at the time. What contributed to them? How do you feel about them now? Try to stand back and look at the bigger picture. Then comes your analysis. Start looking at the experience in depth and focus on vital aspects. Were there key issues that affected something or someone? For example, this could be a lack of knowledge, communication, or time management. What was the issue? What should have happened? Are there theories to help you understand the situation and improve next time? This section is all about examining all the influencing factors and discovering ways to improve. Conclude the key points learned through the reflective process and what to improve on next time. Identify any training needs or skills which could be developed further. This will inform your action plan so that if the same thing happens again, you will be in a more informed and considered position to deal with it. Remember, it's impossible to do everything right for the first time. Looking back at something with hindsight is a great way to move forward. Not everyone reflects automatically. If you can demonstrate your ability to reflect, it may just give you the edge in the future. If you are interested in other reflective models, please see the related videos. Thank you for watching.
So you can see that that's a really quite a simplistic look at Gibbs, but it actually shows in action how that can actually be used really, really effectively. So an academic critical reflection requires you to use academic literature, and that's going to help you analyse your experience a lot more fully. And you need to consider what literature has to contribute to the analysis of your experience. So in order to achieve that good balance, it's important to remember that, like I said before, you need between 10 and 20 references for about 1,000 to 2,000 words. And that's really going to enhance your work and give it meaning and show a real sense of critical ability and therefore overall credibility. So you might say, for instance, you know, if you might say, really, really simplistically, Loach 2021 looked out of the window and said that the sun was going to be that the sun was shining. It might be that Evans looked out of the window and it was a cloudy day. But what does that mean in practice? So in practice, you could say that that really showed you that the only way that you can tell what the weather is like is to look out of the window for yourself, because obviously it depends on when you look out of the window. So that's going to inform your practice going forward. So that's a really simplistic way. It might sound a bit daft, but that's what critical analysis is. That's about saying this piece of information says that, this piece of information says something slightly different, and this one actually relates best to practice and is recommended by a number of bodies as the one that has got most credibility for informing my practice going forward. Finally, what you do is for all the models, you apply what you've learned and you plan for the future. So whichever model it is, it's about learning and going through that journey and planning for the future to inform your practice to get those better outcomes. And that really allows you to then plan for the future and say, if I have that similar experience again, I'll be able to do differently this time, and I'll be able to achieve a better result or a better response. You sometimes need to develop that practical plan for how you're going to approach or do things differently in the future. And that's why Gibbs uses that action plan. And that really shows that you've got evidence of your professional and personal development. When you start out, you begin that reflection, but you don't know what's going to emerge as a result. So it's not really about, right, okay, gathering loads of information when you're doing an essay, because you know where you're going. You're planning that essay, you're planning that assignment out, and you're almost saying at the beginning, your introduction, where you're going to go, what you're going to look at, and then obviously you have that bit at the end, which is the conclusion. But you've got the body of evidence in between. Whereas with a critical reflection, you sometimes don't know which way it's going to lead you, because you've got so much information to be able to find and build upon and critically analyze that it can actually be quite surprising. And that's where you get that eureka moment and you think, yes, it makes sense. You probably at the end of it will have gone on a really tremendous journey. And obviously it is a really powerful journey to go on, and it can only enhance practice. It can only be hopefully be able to inform better practice for your workers, for your stakeholders, for your managers, for all those people that you're working with or for. And obviously it is a really important part of that lifelong learning. When you're describing, you need to have some clarity as well. So think about your language. Some people versus a few people. So if you're going to say a number of sources of information were available, you can't just mention one. You've got to mention what those sources of information were, and give a short, I suppose, description of what they were telling you and how that's informing your practice, because that's really where you're bringing in that critical discussion and that critical analysis. You can also, if you're using a piece of research, for instance, if particularly when you're becoming more masterly in your thinking, it would be important to say whether you felt that research was valid. So if it was only a very small sample size, and they say it was qualitative research that only had 5 participants, it might not be as valid as another piece of research that was much more controlled and had 650 respondents. So obviously you can be judgmental on somebody else's work based on what you are finding, what you are seeing, and what that means. So obviously you can use some meaningful descriptive words such as significant versus important. You also need to consider the context and think about how you choose to describe your experience. What do your language choices tell you? And if anybody's going to read it, about your assumptions, your biases. A vibrant, bustling area, for instance, versus an informal settlement, versus a squatter camp. That then becomes all too, I suppose, meaningful in terms of your biases, your assumptions, and obviously your choices of language can inform what people think about your writing. When you're writing in the first part about what you felt and what you thought, you can use thinking and feeling words such as thought, realised, sensed, experienced, I felt. You can use personal pronouns to make it clear to the reader that you're drawing on your own experiences. So I feel, I realised, it became clear, my experience was. You need to be consistent with the tone of the paragraph. Try not to switch back and forth between first and third person within a single paragraph. And if you're going to use first person, stick to it. Use transitional language to make the sequence of events or realizations clear to the reader. So then, next, subsequently, afterwards, finally, lastly. So you're making it clear in the use of your language where you are in that process. Oops, we've gone forward. You can use comparative language when you're evaluating. So similarly, for instance, Loach 2021 said X, Y, and Z. Evans similarly suggested. Unlike Jones, who said something completely different. So you can use disciplinary or technical language, because obviously if you're using it as a revalidation exercise, then certainly the person that's going to be reading is probably going to understand it. So it's perfectly acceptable to use disciplinary or technical language. You can use the analytical language, and it's really important to do so, such as because, as a result, critically, represent, support, implied. And you need to actually definitely always integrate theory and reference. So without a doubt, I'm going back to that again. When you conclude, you draw the reader's attention back to noteworthy findings. So the most important realization was the relevant issue and the focus for my practice going forward is going to be X, Y, and Z. And you use words that indicate the future: will, may, should, or could. They're all really important words to use as well. So there's some references there for you. The slide set will be put up onto the website as well. So obviously you can revisit those. If there's any references that I can find that would be useful, I'll also put those up. And there'll also be my text for pointers to better critical reflection, which puts it into, I think it's something like, let's just have a look, bear with me. It is something like about 7 pages of A4, which will be up there as well. So I hope that that's inspired you to think about using critical reflection in your practice. And I hope really that it's inspired you to go down that lifelong learning journey in this particular way, so that you can put it down on paper and actually use it for you to be able to revisit again and to inform your practice going forward, so that you can revisit it in a much more structured way. And also really, I suppose, so that, you know, we can prove that we're lifelong learners. We can prove that what the practice that we're doing is evidence-based and is used in terms of adhering to the code. We all signed up to it. There's no point in doing something half-heartedly. If you're going to do it, my old dad always taught me, if you're going to do something, do it properly. Don't do it half-hearted, because you'll never be happy with it. When you've put your heart and soul into the careers like I know all of you are doing every day, particularly in this time of COVID, it's hard work. There's lots of stuff that is happening around you that sometimes you can't make sense of. You know, the death and the dying and the legacy that we're going to be left with for the future. Now we've topped 100,000 deaths, which in my opinion, from a public health perspective, is almost criminal. We need to be able to make sense of things. And hopefully this is a way of trying to do that. Not just of COVID, but as a means of illustration. If there's something obviously is going to inform your practice to get better outcomes for you, for your practice, the people that you work with, the patients, the clients, the workers, the managers, the owners, if you're working for a provider, or anybody else that you work with, is going to be enhanced if you decide to use this type of learning journey. So on that note, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to open up the floor for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing.
I've made a list of some of the questions, Neil, if that's any help.
Yeah, absolutely.
But ironically, you've covered the answers to one or two of them already. Joseph did ask about slides and their availability. You did mention that they'll be available on the website.
Yeah.
Is that available for everybody? Any particular hints on how to access them?
Right, okay, so we're still going to do some final planning. Lynn, Pratt and myself will probably be thinking about this over the next day or so, about where we're going to put them. We'll probably have some kind of repository for each of the recordings. So the recordings are going to be going on to the YouTube channel. So if you haven't found the YouTube channel yet, you can find it by doing a search in YouTube for IOH, the Association of Occupational Health and Wellbeing Professionals. You will find a few of the other IOHs, so the Institute of Hospitality might come up as well, but obviously stick at it and look for the logo that we use with the man in the, I can't remember what it's called, I can't even think what it's called, the logo that we use. Fred, think of Fred, you know, look for Fred in the purple, and I'm sure you'll find IOH. But yeah, we'll put them up. We may even be able to, with some sorcery or witchery, we might even be able to send them out to everybody that registered through Eventbrite. So one way or another, we'll get them to you. Okay.
Deborah asked a question, but I think again you answered that one in your talk, and it was very timely. It was all about whether or not to speak in the third person or not, or the first person when doing reflective.
These are definitely your thoughts and feelings and your emotions. It's about your learning. It's about what you're going to do. So my recommendation is always use the first person.
I had a little question, which was, and we might not have time for it now, so we can pick it up another time, but I was very interested in the VARC. I've never heard of that before. Its application to theory.
Okay, so VARC is, it's about learning styles, and basically VARC is visual. So are you a visual learner? If you can see pictures, if you can see a film, if you like looking at graphs, for instance, graphs are really good for you because you understand them. So your visual is what you can see. Auditory, sometimes, you know, people learn an awful lot more from listening to a podcast. So that would tell you, for instance, that you've got a more auditory style of learning. For other people, it might be reading or writing, which they learn an awful lot more from. And then the kinesthetic is doing. So if somebody shows you how to do something and then you just crack on and you do it, it means that you learn from doing. And it's a really useful way. There are online VARC assessment tools that you can answer a few questions and it will tell you what your learning style is. However, there is a downside to it because there might be a particular instance where you might need a particular learning style. In terms of pedagogy and the art of education and study, it's often said that learning styles are claptrap, and it's basically you use a mixture so that if anybody does have a particular preference to a learning style, you should try and cover all of them, so that at least it gives you the opportunity to be able to get the learning outcomes that you're trying to achieve as a lecturer or as a teacher over to the most amount of people to get the most amount of value. Okay, so does that make sense?
Yeah.
I still think it's got a place. I know that I'm visual. I'm very visual. And I know that when I worked in the NHS and we were doing high level planning about clinics, and we'd got something like, I don't know, 7 or 8 clinic rooms, but we'd got 19 practitioners, and I'd got to work out diaries, and I've got to work out who was going to be available and when they were going to be available. Lucy, she will use a spreadsheet. She's quite analytical. I'm talking about Lucy Kenyon. She did one last week.
Oh dear.
Lucy Kenyon uses spreadsheets, and she's quite analytical and thinking, and she uses process flow mapping, which was a fantastic session last week. I actually need a good old piece of paper pinned to the wall, and I draw pictures all over it. I'm drawing a mind map, and I'm going all over the place. I'm very visual. I need that visual stuff. But equally, I know that I like to do. I'm a doer. I like to do things. And if I see something done, I don't want to see it done a million times. I want to see it probably done once or twice, and then I want to have a go at it, because I learn from my mistakes. I learn from doing. So
thank you. Yeah.
It could be claptrap, but for some people it really is quite powerful. And you'll find that even if you've got some kind of learning disability like Asperger's, like dyslexia or whatever, you can still use different learning styles where it means so much more to be able to have that expressed in that way, so that it means much more for you. So it can be quite powerful, even though some people still hypothesize that it's claptrap.
I need to read about that. I think Lynn had a question as well, didn't you, Lynn?
Yeah, just what your favourite model was, but I think you've probably explained it, Neil.
I do like Driscoll, and the easy one in terms of the one that I suppose most people start off with, and particularly because you can see the journey that, say for instance, our students on the SCPHN programme, they do 4 critical reflections as part of case-based discussions. Our students at Derby don't do a portfolio. And some of you might say, don't do a portfolio? Oh my goodness. You don't need to do a portfolio, because what you're actually doing is you're using critical reflection, and then we actually get you to defend your critical reflections. So we're actually mapping that against the standards and asking analytical questions that is going to allow you to think on the hoof. When you do a portfolio, I will guarantee that every one of you that's done a portfolio, it will be in the loft. And you will never look at it again, unless you're moving house, and then you'll think, oh my God, oh, look at that, isn't it wonderful? With this, it allows you to start on that learning journey. It allows you to do those critical reflections. So in some respects, Gibbs is my favorite, because it's where people start. It's where people start on that learning journey and then progress and go further and use a different one and become more experimental. And then they'll come back to you and say, I like Driscoll, or I like Sean, or I like Kolb. So I suppose my ultimate favorite is Driscoll, but I've got a bit of a penchant for Gibbs, because it is so simplistic and anybody can use it.
Thank you, Neil. That's very helpful.
Any more questions? Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening. I've done so many lectures today. I think I've done about 4 already. I've got a sore throat now, but if you want to stay on, I'm going to stop the recording. If you want to stay on and have just 10 or 15, say 10 or 15 minutes, there's a bit of a social, a bit of a catch up if there's people that you want to catch up on. I'm more than willing to stay in the chat so that we can keep that going just for a little bit. We are planning on thinking sometimes about just doing some social evenings where, we can just get together with old buddies and old friends. I would actually like to say that we are really, really keen for people to become more involved in IOH. I'm really keen to make sure that, we've got, some really good representation on the board, that obviously we're offering value to our members, and obviously without you as members, you know, we're not anything, and we need your input. So if you've got some spare time where you can just become either an advocate, or we'll think about other words if you don't like the word advocate. We used to say activist and people didn't like the word activist. You know, volunteer or whatever it is that you want to be called, it doesn't matter. We need your input. So please, please come forward. If anybody wants to use critical reflection as something that they want to actually have published in OH today, then you can contact Lynn Pratt through admin@ioh.org.uk. We need your publications. This membership association is about you. It's not about the board. Yes, we like to, you know, think about thought leadership, but, you know, unless we know your thoughts and your feelings, then, you know, we're not going to progress, and we're not going to become, you know, the vibrant community that I know we already are. We've got almost 600 members. I think we're about to top the most members that we've ever had in the 30-year history of AOHMP. So we're about to top it. Lucy Kenyon, can you tell me what's the most number of members that we've ever had? Do you remember? Is Lucy still there?
I don't think she is new.
Right, okay. I think it was something like about 605, and we're about to top it. Encourage people to join, encourage people to become active. Thank you very much for your support. It's really, really very much appreciated. And thank you. Good luck.
Okay, and just a reminder, the next session will be on transgender.